Building airplanes is hard. Building large airplanes is harder than building small airplanes. Building large airplanes are competitive in the global marketplace is the hardest of all. Currently, there exists an effective duopoly between the American company Boeing and the pan-European company Airbus for the manufacture of commercial passenger aircraft. As we speak, there are approximately 25,000 commercial aircraft in service globally, of which 11,600 were made by Boeing and 11,000 by Airbus. About 2,000 were made by the Brazilian company Airbus. A minuscule number were made by Chinese and Russian manufacturers. The Canadian company Bombardier used to make commercial jet in 2020. They ceased production of commercial aircraft. They now only make private and business jets. This is a testament to just how difficult it is to make commercial aircraft profitably. In fact, this pie chart understates the level of duopoly enjoyed by Boeing and Airbus. The largest plane Embraer makes is the E195x10 squared, which has a range of 4,800 kilometers in capacity for 120 passengers. This makes it suitable only for regional transportation. For example, it cannot fly from New York to London. Boeing and Airbus are the only two companies in the world that can make economically viable long-haul commercial aircraft. China has the largest aviation market in the world with approximately 4,000 commercial aircraft in service. The vast majority of these are imported from the US and Europe. China's dependence on foreign aircraft is not due to a lack of trying. Over the past 20 years, the Chinese government has invested tens of billions of dollars to subsidize their domestic airplane manufacturer COMAC. Thus far, the results have been unimpressive. Currently, there are just 161 COMAC airplanes in service. But if everything go a plan, COMAC may be on the verge of an inflection point. To the great excitement of aviation enthusiasts, the COMAC C919 made its first commercial flight in May of 2023. The C919 is China's answer to the Boeing 737 and Airbus A320. Today, only 19 have been delivered to a handful of state-owned Chinese airlines. COMAC claims to have orders for 1,000 C919s which will fulfill over the coming years. But there's a big difference between just having 1,000 orders and actually delivering 1,000 planes. In this video, we'll answer 3 questions. Why is it so difficult to make commercially viable passenger jets? How has COMAC attempted to do this? And does COMAC have any hope of breaking the Boeing-Airbus duopoly? China has built civilian aircraft for a long time, although not with very much success. The first modern airplane they made was a 52-seat turboprop airplane called the CNY-7, which entered service in 1984. But this airplane wasn't designed in China. It was a licensed-build version of the Ukrainian An-24, which entered service in the Soviet Union in the early 1960s. By the time the CNY-7 entered service in the 1980s, it was already obsolete and was a commercial failure. Only about 100 units were produced, with the majority being purchased by the Chinese Air Force for use as transport planes. The failure of the A-7 showed that China was still a long way off from being able to produce civilian aircraft that are even remotely viable. In the 1970s, China restored diplomatic relations with the United States. This had massive for the country's civil aviation. Chinese airlines were now able to import Boeing jets such as the 707. Now that they can import modern aircraft, the need to develop domestic manufacturing was no longer acute. In the 1980s, China also started importing planes from Airbus. 40 years later, the situation remains largely the same. Chinese airlines are still almost completely reliant on imports from Boeing and Airbus. So why is it so hard to produce commercial aircraft domestically? From a purely technical perspective, China can absolutely produce aircraft on its own. We know this. They have over 3,000 military planes of various types, the vast majority of which were built domestically. But military aircraft have very different requirements from civilian aircraft. Military aircraft need to perform various functions in a wartime scenario. Cost and efficiency are only of secondary importance. Military planes tend to be far less fuel efficient and require far more maintenance than their civilian counterparts. For example, the U.S. Air Force's C-17 cargo plane can hold a maximum of 134 passengers. According to the Department of Defense, it's $19,000 per hour to fly. We don't have data for Chinese military cargo planes, but they probably have similarly high operating costs, if not greater. For comparison, a Boeing 737 can hold more passengers and only cost about $8,500 per hour, including both fixed and variable costs. So why is it so much cheaper? A civilian passenger plane just needs to get you from point A to point B while satisfying the minimum safety standards set by regulators. All the innovation is focused on reducing the operating cost as low as possible. This involves making fuel-efficient engines as well as standardized and robust parts that are easy to maintain. Boeing and Airbus have a huge head start and their efficiency is constantly improving. While a lot of defense contractors could make civilian airplanes, it might take them a few decades of research and development to match the operating efficiency that Boeing and Airbus have today, and by the time you're ready, Boeing and Airbus will have released new planes that are more efficient still. There's also a chicken and egg problem. If you make an inferior airplane that's less fuel efficient, your Airbus, no airline will buy it. So you have no revenue to reinvest into R&D. There's only one way to overcome this problem: government subsidies on an extreme scale. China has a massive state-owned enterprise called the Aviation Industry Corporation of China, or AVIC. AVIC is a diversified aerospace company that develops both military and civilian aircraft. In 2008, the Chinese government decided to spin off the civilian portion of AVIC into a separate company called the Commercial Aircraft of China, or COMAC. COMAC is still owned and controlled by the government, but it is a separate entity from AVIC. There were two reasons for this. Having COMAC be an independent company gives essential planners in Beijing more direct control over it. Also, as a civilian company, COMAC is able to purchase high-tech components from American and European suppliers. As a subsidiary of AVIC, they'd be subject to more stringent export controls because AVIC is a military company. The first airplane they developed was a C919, which entered service in 2016. It's a small regional jet that can hold between 78 and 90 passengers depending on the seat configuration. The standard range variant can fly 2,200 kilometers. It also has a long-range variant which can fly up to 3,700 kilometers. But even the standard version is suitable for most domestic flights within China. For example, a flight from Beijing to Shenzhen is a little under 2,000 kilometers. While the C919 is assembled in China, most of the parts are either designed or imported from foreign liars. For example, the wings were designed by a Ukrainian company called Antonov. The engines are made by the American company General Electric. The avionics are made by another American company called Rockwell Collins. China has aspirations to eventually make domestic versions for most of these components, so as to have a completely domestic plane. But this will take a long time. You have to learn to walk before you learn to run. To date, COMAC has delivered 162 C919s to airlines. The vast majority of these sales are the Chinese airlines. The Chinese airlines are either state-owned or can be controlled by the state to buy COMAC planes. So these sales aren't really free market transactions. When you have a state-owned airline buying an airplane from a state-owned manufacturer, it's kind of like the right hand selling to the left hand. The transaction price and commercial terms are meaningless. If we look at the customers who purchased the C919, they're two foreign airlines. The Indonesian airline Transnusa ordered 30 C919s, although only 3 have been delivered today. Lao Airline based in Laos ordered 2 C919s, of which 1 has been delivered to date. On the surface, it looks encouraging that 2 foreign airlines purchased the C919. But if we dig a little deeper, it's not quite as good as it looks. Before COVID, the Indonesian airline Transnusa leased all of its airplanes. During COVID, their revenue collapsed. They were not able to make their lease payments and thus lost all of their planes. If they wanted to resume operations, they would need to secure outside capital. So in 2021, they received an investment from the China Aircraft Leasing Company or CALC in exchange for a 49% equity stake. CALC is owned by the Chinese government. While CALC is technically a minority investor, they nonetheless have significant control over TransNusa's operations. So they made sure that TransNusa purchased COMAC planes. Again, this is not an open market transaction. It's the right hand selling to the left hand. The only truly independent airline to purchase the C919 is Lao Airlines, which ordered a grand total of 2 units. The C909 can be considered a commercial failure. Nobody really buys it unless the Chinese government can force them to. Most analysts believe it is less fuel efficient than comparable Boeing and Airbus planes. While we don't have accurate fuel efficiency statistics that would explain the poor sales numbers. To understand the importance of fuel economy, let's look at the example of the American ultra-low-cost carrier Frontier. I chose Frontier because they lease almost all their airplanes, which makes the analysis a bit simpler. In 2020-4, generated $3.8 billion of revenue. Their single largest expense was jet fuel at $1 billion. The cost of leasing their airplanes was $700 million. They spent about $200 million on maintenance. And finally, they spent about $1.8 billion on all other expenses, including employee salaries, airport-related expenses, and marketing. This left them with an operating profit of $58 million. A razor-thin margin of less than 2%. Fuel and maintenance combined cost $2 billion. Almost double the cost of leasing the planes. Let's say hypothetically the COMAC plane is 20% less fuel efficient and also costs 20% more to maintain. The fuel and maintenance cost will increase by about $250 million. The aircraft leasing cost is only $700 million. So to offset the higher operating cost, you would have to sell a COMAC airplane for 1/3 cheaper than a comparable Boeing or Airbus. We don't know how much it cost COMAC to build each airplane. But given their much lower production volume, the cost per unit is almost much higher. In 2020-4, COMAC produced just 35 C909s. For comparison, in that same year, Airbus made 766 A321s. To be fair, the C909 was COMAC's first aircraft. It wasn't necessarily supposed to be a commercial success. Its primary purpose was to allow COMAC to gain valuable learnings and expertise so as to make better airplanes in the future. Their second plane is a C919. It is larger than the C909 with a maximum passenger capacity of 192. The Chinese government has high hopes for the C919. It's supposed to be the plane to finally break the Boeing-Airbus duopoly. The C919 made its first commercial flight in May of 2023 with the state-owned China Eastern Airline. Many aviation enthusiasts have sung praises of the C919 due to its modern interior and apparent similarity to the Boeing 737 and Airbus A320. While it might provide a great passenger experience, what matters much more to the airlines is a fuel economy. The C919 is meant to compete with the Airbus A320neo and Boeing 737-8. All three planes are very similar in terms of size and passenger capacity. If we look at the fuel capacity and max range of each aircraft, we can compare the fuel efficiency. The C919 can hold about 25,000 liters of fuel and has a max range of 5,555 kilometers. That translates to 4.49 liters per kilometer. The A320neo is slightly more efficient at 4.24 liter per kilometer. The 737-8 is the most efficient of all, consuming just 3.98 liters per kilometer. Thus, the C919 consumes 6% more fuel than the A320neo and 13% more fuel than the 737-8. While these aren't huge differences, remember the analysis we did earlier. If you have even slightly worse fuel efficiency, airlines won't be willing to pay nearly as much for your aircraft. So why is the C919 less fuel efficient? There are many potential reasons. COMAC still has far less experience, so Cezena manufacturing processes aren't as advanced. While China has worked on developing a domestic aerospace supply chain, COMAC is still heavily dependent on imported components. For example, the C919's engines are made by joint venture between the American company General Electric and the French company Safran. While some suppliers are willing to work with COMAC, many are wary of supplying certain advanced materials and avionics, especially if they're easy to reverse engineer. China has a long history of intellectual property theft. With COMAC being a state-owned enterprise, the Chinese government is unlikely to enforce international patent laws against them. COMAC claims to have received over 1,000 orders for their C919, but most of these are non-binding letters of intent. And just like with the C909, the vast majority come from airlines or aircraft leasing companies that are either owned or controlled by the Chinese government. COMAC has indeed made massive advances over the past 20 years. But this has come at an exorbitant cost. COMAC's finances are opaque, but the company is believed to be operating deep in the red. The Center for Strategic and Air National Studies estimates that the Chinese government has provided $49 billion of direct funding to the company since inception. This actually understates the level of government support. You also need to consider the massive indirect support provided by state-owned airlines. They almost certainly would not have purchased these planes in a free market environment. China has made civilian aerospace a key strategic priority, so will likely continue to fund COMAC despite the high cost. In the West, if an airline buys an airplane that's 10% less fuel efficient than its competitors, it won't be able to compete and will go bankrupt. Competition pushes ticket prices down to the point where they can't cover the cost of an inefficient plane. In the domestic Chinese market, the situation is different. The government can force all the state-run airlines to buy the same COMAC planes, thereby creating a level playing field. The cost will be passed on to the consumer. If Chinese consumers have to pay 10% higher ticket prices for domestic flights, it's not great, but it's also not the end of the world. Remember that China has the largest civil aviation market in the world with almost 4,000 planes and counting. COMAC has orders for 1,000 airplanes. The domestic market can certainly soak up 1,000 new planes perhaps over the next decade. In the beginning of this video, we post the question, can COMAC break the Boeing Airbus duopoly? The answer is probably yes, but only within China. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this video. What do you think about COMAC? Let us know in the comment section below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Wall Street Millennial signing out.